This morning, if you would, turn with me to 1 Samuel chapter 1. I'd like to read verses 9 through 18. I'll be reading from the New Living Translation. It says this: Once, when they were at Shiloh, Hannah went over to the tabernacle after supper to pray to the Lord. Eli the priest was sitting at his customary place beside the entrance. Anna was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow: O Lord Almighty, if you will look down upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. He will be yours his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. As she was praying to the Lord, Eli watched her, seeing her lips moving, but hearing no sound. He thought that she was drinking. Must you come here drunk? He demanded. Throw away your wine. Oh, no, sir, she replied. I am not drunk, but I am very sad, and I was pouring out my heart to the Lord. Please don't think that I am a wicked woman, for I have been praying out of great anguish and sorrow. In that case, Eli said, cheer up. May the God of Israel grant your request you have asked him. Oh, thank you, sir, she exclaimed. Then she went back and began to eat again, and she was no longer sad. You know, Mother's Day is not everyone's favorite day of the year. Your mother may have passed away. You may have not so good memories of your mother. The Bible does record a few of those. You may have longed to be a mother and were not able to. Or even worse, your children may not want to have anything to do with you. Melanie and I had a couple that we were very good friends with, and they struggled for a long time to have children, and they finally did. The first child came, and Kathy went back to the doctor, and the doctor said, well, what kind of precautions are you taking to prevent pregnancy? And she said, none. She said, if you knew how much trouble we had having this kid, you wouldn't be asking that. And the doctor said, I'll see you in about 9 months. And they did. But I still remember how hard Mother's Day was for her. When she wanted children, but she was unable to have them. And for her, Mother's Day was really, really hard. In this particular story, Hannah's husband had 2 wives. Now that was never God's intention, but the Bible, part of the thing that makes it so believable is that we see the good and the bad, even in the Bible heroes. We look at David, the guy who killed Goliath and did all those amazing things, and yet we see the skeletons that were in his closet. The skeleton that he had with Bathsheba, the one that we talked about, what was it, last Sunday, where out of his pride he numbered the fighting men, and God sent judgment as a result of that. That's part of what makes the Bible so real, is we see the good and the bad in people. You know, it'd be like Superman, but a Superman that hates cats or something. I don't know. In this particular story, not only did Hannah struggle because she couldn't have children, she struggled because her husband's other wife did have kids and constantly, belittled her and harassed her and just made her feel horrible. And so she goes to the Lord and she prays for a son. And you can see the anguish as you read the passage that's in her heart. You know, Hannah promised that if God gave her a son, she would raise him as a Nazirite. There's another Nazirite in the Bible that we all know and remember and is famous. Can anybody think of his name? Anybody? He was really strong. Samson. Remember? He never had a razor touch his head until Delilah. And then when his hair was cut, he lost all of his strength, right? I don't think it was specifically because of the hair. It was because he broke other Nazirite parts of his vow. One of those that he would not drink any alcohol, right? But in Samson's mind, it was the hair that made the vow. And when that happened, he lost his strength, right? That God had supernaturally given him. But Samuel here is a Nazirite as well, which I think is interesting and one that we don't normally think about. But this morning, as we look at Hannah, as we look at Samuel's mom, there's 4 things that I think that we can see. And the first is this, that she was a woman of faith. Hannah was a woman of faith. In 1 Samuel 1, verse 3 and verse 7, it says this, year after year, this man, Hannah's husband, went up from his town to worship and sacrifice to the Lord Almighty at Shiloh, where Hophni and Phinehas, the 2 sons of Eli, were priests of the Lord. This went on year after year. Whenever Hannah went up to the house of the Lord, her rival provoked her till she wept and would not eat. One of the things that we can see here is that Hannah and her husband were in the habit of worship. In Hannah's day, there was no such thing as a synagogue. In Israel, there was the tabernacle. And that's where you went to worship God. That's where you offered your sacrifices. That's where the high priest, in this case Eli, was at, with his 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas. The synagogues don't come into existence until after the Israelites go into captivity, and they're no longer able to worship at the temple. And so if you wanted to worship in Hannah's day, you went down to Shiloh because the temple wasn't built yet in Jerusalem, and you worshiped the Lord there. And clearly, Hannah and her husband were in the habit of doing that. When God grants Hannah's request, and Samuel is born, Hannah raised Samuel until he was weaned. And it's interesting that there must have been quite an impact on Samuel. Why do I say that? Samuel's mother, Hannah, must have had quite an impact on him because Eli had 2 sons of his own, Hophni and Phinehas, and they were both bad. What happened was Eli spent so much time going about doing God's business at the tabernacle that he did a really poor job of raising his sons. That's something that we don't see in Samuel. Even though Samuel is raised after he's weaned by Eli. Remember Hophni and Phinehas' dad? Hannah must have had a tremendous impact on Samuel in order for him to continue to serve God, even in the midst of Hophni and Phinehas and the influence that they certainly would have had on him. You know, in our society today, the role of moms and dads has never been greater. The importance of your role has never been greater than it is today. Because we live in a society and we live in a world that is trying to pull our kids away from their spiritual heritage, away from their spiritual roots. We live in a society today where when our kids go to school and to college, rather than being taught biblical principles, they're actively taught and encouraged non-biblical things. The influence that parents have on their kids is more important now than it has ever been. And how you raise your kids will determine how the rest of their life goes. The Bible says, raise up a child in the way he should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. You have a tremendous opportunity to influence your kids. And it's so tremendously important because the world is just constantly trying to pull them away. Secondly, we can see that Hannah was a woman of prayer. In 1 Samuel 1, 10 through 11, we see Hannah. And it says here in the New Living Translation, Hannah was in deep anguish, crying bitterly as she prayed to the Lord. And she made this vow, O Lord Almighty, if you will look down upon my sorrow and answer my prayer and give me a son, then I will give him back to you. And he will be yours his entire lifetime. And as a sign that he has been dedicated to the Lord, his hair will never be cut. Hannah kept that promise. She was a woman of prayer. You know, honestly, I think it's easier for women to trust God than it is for men. Maybe it's part of the way that they're wired. Because we're not wired the same at all. You know, women will ask for directions when they're lost. Guys, we'll get there somehow. Right? Women will ask for help when they need it. Guys, well, not so much, right? Women will actually read those instructions in the box for the kids' toys, you know, that has those dreaded words on it, some assembly required. You know, men, our first thing is we'll just try to we dump the parts out into a pile, and we try to assemble it. If that doesn't work, then, you know, we look at the pictures. If the pictures don't work, then we'll call a friend, right? And invite them to come over and help us. And then if all else fails, then we'll look at the directions. I think for some reason it's easier for women to trust God than it is for men. Maybe it's our macho ego that thinks that somehow we can do it on our own. But moms know that they can't. And it's easier for them to trust God in the things that they know that they can't do. In this case, we see very clearly that Hannah was a woman of prayer. Thirdly, I'd like to think that she was a woman of discipline. In Proverbs 13:24, it says this: if you refuse to discipline your children, it proves that you don't love them. If you love your children, you'll be prompt to discipline them. How many of you remember back 23 years ago when Melanie and I tried out to come preach here. Pam knows where I'm going. On that particular day, one of my daughters made a trip to the basement. And on the way to the basement, she wailed the whole way, "Please don't spank me." At least Pam remembers. My mom took that verse that says, "He who spares the rod spoils the child." She took that verse and she made it her own. Because my mom believed in that verse. Sometimes I wonder if I had calluses on my bottom. And I'll be honest with you, I deserved every spanking that I ever got, plus a whole bunch more. I never got a spanking that I didn't deserve. But I can honestly tell you, for a very, very long time, every Sunday after church, when we got back to the parsonage, it was Debbie and David upstairs, Dan, drop them. I got a lot of spankings. But I think I turned out pretty good. I think I turned out okay. And there are times that I wonder if maybe that wouldn't have been so good if Mom hadn't been so diligent to correct me and make me better. You see, the honest truth is, sometimes what's best for us is not what we want. I mean, cake and ice cream would be great for 3 meals a day. I'd love that, right? Throw in a little pie and it'd be fantastic. But it wouldn't be very healthy for me. And it wouldn't be very long before I started having physical problems. In order for a mom to be a good mom, she's got to be willing to discipline her children. And that's not easy, but it's tremendously important. I recently saw this essay. It's called "The Meanest Mother in the World." It says this: "I had the meanest mother in the world. While other kids had candy for breakfast, I had to eat my cereal, eggs, and toast. While other kids had cakes and candies for lunch, I had a sandwich. As you can guess, my supper was different from other kids' supper too. My mother was so mean that she insisted on knowing where we were at all times. You'd think we were in prison or something. She had to know who our friends were and what we were doing. I'm ashamed to admit this, but my mother actually had the nerve to break the child labor laws. She made us work. She had us wash dishes, make our beds, and learn how to cook and clean. I think my mother must have stayed awake at night thinking of things for us kids to do. And she insisted that we tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. She never let me get away with anything. By the time we were teenagers, my mother was even wiser, and my life became even more unbearable. She would embarrass us by insisting that our friends come to the door instead of honking the horn for us to come running. And she always insisted that we be home early on school nights and never let us stay out late on weekends like all of our other friends. We missed so much fun. Mother was so mean that she refused to let us date at the mature age of 13 and 14, like so many of our friends did. Instead, we had to wait until we were 16. She kept telling us that there was a lot of time and that we needed to grow up a bit first. Mother really raised a bunch of squares. None of us was ever arrested for shoplifting. or busted for dope. And who do you think we have to thank for this? You're right. Our mean old mother. I'm trying to raise my children to stand up a little straighter and taller, and I'm secretly tickled to pieces when my children call me mean. Thank God for giving me the meanest mother in the world. See, children need fences. Fences do two things. They keep good things in, and they keep bad things out. When I was growing up, my mom was kind of like the mom in the story. She wanted to know where I was, know who my friends were. I grew up in a town half the size of Alburnett. But my mom wanted to know where I was at. And my mom didn't have a problem when she set down the rules of being the bad guy. I could tell my friends, man, I'd love to go do that with you, but if I did and my mom caught me, man, it'd be really, really bad. She didn't mind being the bad guy because she knew that she was protecting me. And the fences that she was establishing not only kept good things in, it kept bad things out. Our children need discipline. Because without it, we're crippling them in the real world. Do you honestly think in most jobs, now I'm not talking about Parker this morning, okay? But in most jobs, if you showed up late every single day, that you would continue to have a job? You know, the discipline that we teach our kids now are the disciplines that will help them for the rest of their life. And so, the sooner that we teach our kids to respect authority, the easier it will be for them when they need to respect the authority of police officers or employers or judges. Discipline is important. And then finally, we see that Hannah gave her very best to the Lord. She gave her very best to the Lord. When Samuel was old enough to eat, Hannah took him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh, along with a 3-year-old bull, 1/2 bushel of flour, and a leather bag filled with wine. After they had killed the bull for the sacrifice, Hannah brought Samuel to Eli. She said to Eli, "As surely as you live, sir, I am the same woman who stood near you praying to the Lord. I prayed for this child, and the Lord answered my prayer and gave him to me. Now I give him back to the Lord. He will belong to the Lord all his life." And he worshiped the Lord there. I imagine that day was the hardest day in Hannah's life, because she took Samuel to the tabernacle and left him there. And every year she came back and she got to see him, and she brought him a robe. But she gave the very best, the very most important thing in her entire life to her, back to God. Have you ever, I'm not sure if if we can really, truly understand how hard that was for Hannah, unless we've experienced a similar thing. Now, I'm telling you, it'd be hard to give any of my children, to leave any of them. But to have, suffered for years and years and years being childless, and then that child, to leave them, at the tabernacle. I can't imagine it. Now, in this story, Hannah left her son with the high priest. Please don't do that here. I love all of your kids. But please don't do that. Because of what Hannah did, Samuel was the last judge and the first prophet in Israel. And he made a tremendous difference. In fact, God at one point will say, when Israel is getting ready to go into captivity, he will say, even if Moses and Samuel were here in front of me to try to get me to change my mind, I would not relent in what I'm about to do. Can you imagine what kind of props that is for Moses and Samuel? To say that they were so powerful in persuading God, that even if they were here, this is too late, right? I mean, that's a tremendous amount of praise coming from God in regard to Samuel. The one really sad thing about this story is not about Hannah. Hannah did an amazing job with Samuel. Samuel was a tremendous man of God. The sad thing is that Samuel did the same thing with his sons that Eli did with Hophni and Phinehas. He is so busy trying to do the Lord's work that his sons turned out wicked. And I think in there is a warning for each and every one of us as well. You can be so busy trying to do the right things that really, truly important things get left undone. For those of you that are parents, God has entrusted you with the most powerful, precious, special thing in the entire universe. He's entrusted you with a human soul that's going to spend eternity in one of two places. And I guess my encouragement this morning is don't screw it up. Moms, thank you. Thank you for all of the things that you do. For taking care of us when we're sick. For being there when we're hurt, both physically and emotionally. Us guys, we don't do so good at that. Thank you. And those of you that are kids, and every one of you are, if your mom is still alive, I encourage you to thank her. Let her know just how special she really, really, truly is.